only thing you need is your laptop. It doesn't have it on you.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. We're going to begin in just one moment.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first of an ongoing series of virtual field trips this month, brought to you by Timelooper. My name is Andrew Feinberg, and I'm a principal here with Timelooper, and we're so grateful that all of you across the country and around the world are joining us today to learn about an incredibly important topic with an incredible American hero, Captain Matthews. I am going to step back now and pass it off to the facilitator of today's webinar. Her name is Rashida Wyndham. She is a creative lead on the Timelooper team, and she will be facilitating the conversation with Captain Matthews. We will allow for 30 to 35 minutes of facilitated conversation between Rashida and Captain Matthews. During that time, if you have questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat bar, and then we will hopefully address those questions at the end. If you are a school group in a classroom or a student independently logging on at home and you feel like it's appropriate to ask questions by video, please also feel free to raise your hand, and we'd love to see faces of students around the country as we get to the end of the webinar. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Rashida and allow you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and good afternoon, Captain Matthews. How are you doing?
Fine.
Great. Okay, so let's just jump right in. So we cannot start a conversation on the Buffalo Soldiers without explaining the contents in which they arose. Can you please shed some light on the evolving role that African Americans played in the United States Army before and during the Civil War? I know it's a big question, but if you could go ahead and answer that.
All right. Well, the African Americans participated in all of American military campaigns from the Revolutionary War to the Persian Gulf War. The official induction into the Civil War occurred because of the Emancipation Proclamation. So the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, but it also authorized the enlistment of African American soldiers. So more than 200,000 Black men fought during the Civil War. So they were in about 200 regiments. A regiment is about 1,000 soldiers. As a matter of fact, they received more than 25 Medal of Honors.
Great, wow, that's really interesting. So upon the conclusion of the Civil War, what led to the creation of the Buffalo Soldiers?
Well, at the end of the Civil War, matter of fact, a year and a half after the conclusion of the Civil War, the Army reorganized and established the first peacetime Army for the U.S. And as a part of the reorganization, they created 6 all-Black units: the 9th and 10th Cavalry, the 38th, 39th, 40th, and 41st Infantry. And then 3 years later, in 1869, the 4 Infantry became the 24th and 25th. And those 4 units, the 9th and 10th Cavalry, the 24th and 25th Infantry, went on to become what we commonly call now the Buffalo Soldiers.
Okay, and could you explain a little bit about peacetime military creation? Would you why was it created and why is it important?
Well, the units were created because the Army just reorganized.
Okay.
After every major engagement, the Army, reorganized, and that's basically what happened.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. All right, so the Buffalo Soldiers were sent to the most remote locations in the American West. Can you give us a bit of a geographical scope of where they were sent and why?
Yes, well, the Buffalo Soldiers were the peacekeepers in the American West. They built camps and forts and railroads, delivered the mail, strung telegraph wires, charted the land, chased down outlaws, comancheros. As a matter of fact, without the Buffalo Soldiers, the westward movement would have been delayed, 50 years.
Wow. So they're extremely important to the
Oh, yeah.
creation of the United States as we know it today.
Yeah, they were stationed at all of the forts west of the Mississippi,
Mm,
Texas, Montana, Arizona, New Mexico, etc.
okay. So one really important question that I have for you today is one of the tasks of the Buffalo Soldiers was moving Native Americans onto reservations. Are there any records that discuss their feelings on displacing a group of people? And was there any resistance against completing these tasks? I know it's a bit of a difficult question, but I think it's important to ask.
It's not a difficult question. It's an easy question. You know, American history is contradictory.
Mm,
There's plenty of somebody did somebody wrong. And the founding fathers, they talked about liberty and justice for all, but that wasn't the case for Black folks. Native Americans fought with the Confederacy during the Civil War because they wanted to maintain the slaves that they had. As a matter of fact, the last Confederate general to surrender was a Cherokee in the Indian Territory, in what we call now Oklahoma. You know, so the Buffalo Soldiers basically protected the Native Americans from the settlers and the settlers from the Native Americans.
wow, that's really
So
interesting.
yeah, so no, that's a very easy question.
Okay. Is there any ongoing discussions or reconciliation between the Buffalo Soldier Preservation community and Native American communities today?
I know the National Native American Museum in Washington, D.C., they've had several exhibits um, on the relationship between the African American soldier and the Native Americans. Here in Houston at the Buffalo Soldier National Museum, we have met with several of the local Native American museum personnel, and we are open to any museum quality exhibits that they have. So that the doors are open, and we get a lot of that, a lot of back and forth. When we first opened, just for your background, 2001, I used to get emails, hate mail actually, from Native Americans, uh, advocates that had some issues with Buffalo Soldiers. But I rarely get those now uh, because you have to be careful when you're a historian and when you cherry pick things. You can cherry pick anything
Right,
and come up with what you want.
right, exactly.
Yeah,
Um,
but it's a
so
great story.
yeah, it's really interesting too, and it's really great to see this reconciliation happening. And you
Oh
guys are
yeah,
coming up almost on your 10th anniversary this year, right?
yeah, 20th anniversary.
20th anniversary. I'm sorry. I'm still thinking I'm still in 2010. When So I know education was a big motivating factor for African American men to enlist in the Army. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what was the importance? And did the act of getting this quality education act for an equalizer for soldiers that return to their civilian life? And maybe go a little bit into the risk of receiving this education once they transition back.
Yeah, that's a great question. When the Army created these 4 Black units, they assigned a chaplain to each one of the regiments. Normally, you have a chaplain for each post or each division, but the chaplain in the Black regiment served as an educator, a teacher. So they taught the soldiers how to read and write and other scholarly activities. As a matter of fact, the chaplain and in the Army was the first opportunity for many of these soldiers to learn how to read and write.
It's really interesting. And it seems like this is kind of a connection that's strung along our history of how important the church is with education and various aspects. So I find that really interesting to see those threads still carrying on.
Oh yeah, yeah. The chaplains played a key role. As a matter of fact, because the soldiers or the troopers would move from place to place, the chaplain designed a standardized teaching process or program, and this is the basic for the modern day school system that we have now.
Wow.
Which was,
Okay. So, how did the Buffalo Soldiers pay compared to white soldiers at the time? Did
uh,
Buffalo Soldiers were they able to earn outside of the military? And then how did that quality of education and pay? Could you then talk a little bit about how that kind of spurred the civil rights movement?
right. The Buffalo Soldiers were paid $13 a month. This was the same as the other soldiers. But prior to the Civil War, during the U.S. colored troops, they were paid less. But after the Civil War, the salary was the same. So, and to just give you some perspective, some context, if you were Black in America prior to the Civil War, you were basically doing four things: picking cotton, cutting sugar cane, working in tobacco fields, or working in the rice paddies. Uh, Guess what you were doing after the Civil War?
Mhm.
Picking cotton,
Right.
cutting sugar cane, working tobacco field, working in the rice paddies. Nothing really changed. So the military offered an opportunity for those soldiers, and they took advantage of that. And the military, in my estimation, was on the vanguard of the modern day civil rights movement. The GI Bill played a key role. If you look at, for example, here in Houston in the 1940s with Texas Southern University, they had a trade school there that graduated plumbers and carpenters, pipe fitters, teachers, doctors. You know, this has created a strong middle class.
Mm.
So the military, you know, played a key role in that.
Wow, it's really interesting. And there's just so many connections that we just don't hear about. So I'm fascinated to learn more. Okay. So why were African Americans not allowed to serve with other white soldiers despite being free?
Right, that's a good question. The military, you know, is a macrocosm of America. The military basically reflected the mores and forays of America. And during that time, we lived in a segregated society.
Mm.
So the military was segregated.
Yeah. And then would you be able to know or tell us about if there's any testimonies between the interactions between black and white soldiers, even though there was this segregation?
Yeah, we know doing the wartime activities, race is less of an issue
Mm.
because your survival depends on the soldiers to your left and to your right. You know, whether you're Black, white, Palomino, olive tan, you know, it doesn't matter. But in peacetime, though, especially if you're in the base camp, that's a different story.
Mm.
So the norms of the modern day environment are very apparent. You know, I can give you personal examples when I was in Vietnam.
Wow.
In the base camp, you had some uh, difficulties with the different races. You know, this is in 1968, 1969. Uh, but when you were in the field, you know, the soldier to the left and the soldier to the right, there were no, you know, racial issues then. But you know, you got to remember the military is basically a reflection of who we are as a nation.
Wow. Well, and thank you for your service. That's amazing to hear.
Uh,
So, at a high level, what was the road from the Buffalo Soldier regiments in the 19th century to African American enlistees in the first half of the 20th century? What types of conditions did they face during World War One and World War Two?
yeah, well, here again, it's the same type of thing. You know, America at the time was segregated, so the army was segregated. You know, and this sort of reminds me of the number one question that I get from Europeans when they come to the museum is, you know, why did the Black man stay so patriotic to America in the face of segregation, discrimination, lynching, and all the other things? And I take them to Frederick Douglass. You know, he made a very important point at the start of the Civil War. Frederick Douglass said, and I'll paraphrase, you know, give the colored man a uniform, a buckle with the U.S. on it, a button with an eagle on it, and a musket. And you make him a citizen, but you also make him a man. Because what he was trying to do was make sure the Civil War was being fought for freedom and not just to save the Union. And the only way you can do that, you put the black man in the blue uniform. And that same concept was taken up by W.D. Du Bois in World War I. He wrote an article in the Crisis magazine, the famous article said, put aside your differences, go
Of
overseas,
course.
come back and be first-class citizen. And in World War II, you had the same thing, said a little differently. It was the double V for victory. Victory against the Axis in Europe and victory against racism at home.
Wow. Wow, that's fascinating to hear, and it's really inspiring as well.
Okay.
So how would you qualify the journey of African American servicemen since President Truman integrated the armed forces in 1948?
Well, you know, they've come a long way. The Truman integrated the Army 1948, Executive Order 9981, but it didn't really happen until the Korean conflict during the 1950s. As a matter of fact, the first fully integrated army wasn't until Vietnam in the 1960s. And we have a good example of that at the museum. We have a letter that was written by a trooper Washington. He was in Korea in 1951. And he writes this letter to his mom, who lives in Brownwood, Texas. And he starts off by saying, things are quiet here. I hope things are quiet at home. And then he said, we heard today that our unit was going to be integrated. You know, that's a very powerful letter. You know, he said he was concerned that he didn't know how the black soldiers and the white soldier were going to mingle and interact with that. But here you have 1951, a black man in Korea fighting for the liberations of Koreans in a segregated army in 1951. Very powerful.
Very powerful. And just one question I had from just doing a bit of research was I was reading that President Truman was really, I guess, disgusted about the lynchings of African American men when they came back from World War II. And then this is what kind of spurred this executive order. Could you go in a little bit that? Was that correct? Or maybe your thoughts and opinions about that as well?
Yeah, about his motivation for, yeah, I mean, it was partly political, which in America, almost everything is partly political. And so I think the service of the black man and the opportunities to show some type of appreciation for the service that was done, I think was a part of his overall thinking in that.
Okay. So to bring it back a little bit to today's, what was your reaction to the appointment and confirmation of Lloyd Austin as the most recent and first African-American Secretary of Defense?
Well, I think the first thing that came to mind, General Austin had crossed the bridge that was built by the Buffalo Soldiers. And I think the Buffalo Soldiers, if they were around today, the ones that built this bridge would say the mission is complete. I think the first black graduate from the military academy at West Point, 1877, Lieutenant Henry O. Flipper, he's probably looking down and saying, well done. And personally, you know, what I'm saying is, you know, ready and forward. And hopefully we don't have to say that it's unique that an African American is now leading, you know, Secretary of Defense. It's very powerful.
It is very powerful. It's been a very great year for that. So I'm
Right.
looking for it as well. So what is the continued legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers? Can you elaborate about that?
Yeah, the legacy lives on. I think the legacy is tied into what our mission is. And our mission is to preserve, promote, and perpetuate the honor and legacy of the brave men and women who fought, bled, and died in defense of America. And we want the world to know that.
And then how does the Buffalo Soldier National Museum continue this legacy? So can you explain maybe some events you guys are doing and how you help out?
Oh yeah, I think we have some our museum personnel online that can go through more in detail of all the events. But I think through creative and interactive programs and exhibits that we have, I think my personal perspective, you know, the thing that I enjoy most is I induct students into the ranks of the Buffalo Soldier.
Oh,
I
wow.
make them all spiritual descendants.
Mm.
You know, there are three ways to be a descendant of the Buffalo Soldier. You can be a bloodline descendant, which needs no explanation. It basically means that you're a relative of a Buffalo Soldier. You can be a regimental descendant, which means that you served in a unit that came out of the original units. Or you can be, like me, and 25,000 other students in the greater Houston area. You can be a spiritual descendant. And in my humble opinion, being a spiritual descendant is far more important because it means that you made a conscious decision that you believe in the three basic principles that the Buffalo Soldier stood for. And those three principles are honor, valor, and courage.
Really great words. I love that. So, what are the ways that we can engage and learn more about the Buffalo Soldiers?
Well, I think you know, visit the museum in person or online. You know, support the museum through monetary donations. You know, volunteer if possible, and spread the word about the honor and legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers.
I definitely agree. And also, since Timelooper does have a app that's an AR app that you can actually go and learn more
Right.
right from home. So I think that's great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm, that's great. Okay, so I think that's it for me. I want to just open up the floor to any questions that anyone may have, and then we can move from there.
Captain Matthews, thank you so much. So one of the first questions that came in is as follows. Based upon the insights that you've shared today and that which some of our attendees already know, it seems that in some instances, the military has actually been at the vanguard of the treatment of the improved condition of African Americans and the way that they're treated in this country. What role do you see the military playing in our current times, given all of the issues that we've been dealing with over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think it continue with the educational process, the opportunities for you know, schooling. You know, there are many neighborhoods that in the Black communities where students don't have the opportunity or the funds, but they can't get that by going in the military and then going on to higher education. I think those are the areas that the military has participated in the past, and I think they continue to do that. The GI Bill is still available. You know, moving into the uh, 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 higher economic status. So I think the military plays a key role in that.
It's really great.
Sorry,
And
go ahead, Rashida.
I just saw another question just come in. I'm not sure, Andrew, if there was another question before this one. It says, do you have any thoughts about the relationship between the Buffalo Soldiers and Native Americans? The contradictory alliances in that conflict is very interesting.
Yeah, we actually talked about that
Mm.
in the opening statements. The Buffalo Soldiers, like I said, were the peacekeepers in the American West, and yeah, they built camps and forts and railroads. They protected the Native Americans from the settlers and the settlers from the Native Americans. So, yeah, there were Blacks that were part of the Native American community. Um, uh, when the slaves escaped from the plantation, many of them went north and northeast with Harriet Tubman, but some of them went south through Florida and on into the Caribbean. And those that stayed in Florida intermingled with the Seminoles and became the Seminole Negro Indians. And many of them became scouts for the Union Army after the Civil War. You know? So there are a lot of interactions between the African American and the Native American. Great question.
Another question that just came in is in relation to the treatment of Buffalo soldiers upon de-enlistment. So after they had done their service and they returned home, what treatment did they typically face in different parts of the country, relative to or compared to their fellow African Americans in their local communities who might not have served.
Right. Well, in the Black community, we've always had a high respect for soldiers. I can recall on Sundays going to church, and a soldier would come in from World War II that has been in, or the Korean War, and the parishioners would stand up. So that's always been a highly respected. Going back from the comments I made from Frederick Douglass through World War I and World War II. But you still got to remember that America was highly segregated at the time. And so there was a lot of prejudice. And so the Black soldiers didn't escape that, whether they were a civilian or whether they were, military. It was the signs of the times.
All right, any other questions out there
Mhm.
from our community?
Yeah.
Not seeing any, but feel free to ask any questions. I like to always encourage that there's like no dumb question. If you have any curiosities or anything, I think it would be great to hear.
Great.
All right, well, then if there are no additional questions, we just want to wrap up by reminding everybody, first of all, that this webinar series will continue next Thursday, same place, same time, where we will examine the role of school integration in the civil rights movement with a case study at Little Rock Central High School. The week after that, on February 18th, there will be an examination of the role of the church in the civil rights movement and the role that children played in the Children's Crusade with 16th Street Baptist Church and Historic Bethel Baptist Church in Birmingham. And then wrapping up, that should say February 25th, apologies, Historic Tabernacle Baptist Church in Selma, where we will examine the role of the church and the African-American community in the voting rights movement, of course, including the famous march from Selma to Montgomery. And then, of course, one other thing that we'd like to mention here is that the Buffalo Soldier National Museum, inclusive of many others, are offering custom virtual field trips for your school. So we would encourage you to go to virtualfieldtrip.com. Here in the upper right-hand corner, you could see where you'll have the opportunity to book private virtual field trips with Captain Matthews and his colleagues at the Buffalo Soldier National Museum. It's a wonderful way to support the museum, to support their mission, as well as to provide a more intimate experience for your students where not only will they have the opportunity to ask questions, but also as teachers, you'll have the opportunity to help shape the educational plan of that virtual field trip. So with that, it seems like we did receive one last question. Is there a listing of Buffalo Soldiers that can be accessed?
Yeah, we have it on our website.
On the website.
Yeah, we don't have a complete list, but we have some. There's also a listing in a couple of books that I have. I think they're listed on the website at all.
Okay, that's great to hear. And then we have another question. Will these webinars be available afterwards? Yes, they will. And you can visit us at our website. Andrew, would you mind linking down below so people would be able to access? Yeah, and we definitely would like you to have students be involved as well too.
And of course, on virtualfieldtrip.com is where you can also link to the incredible augmented reality experiential app that the Buffalo Soldier National Museum put together that's free to download. So your students can open up an interactive map of the American West in the late 19th century and go on an interpretive journey through the museum and through time.
Really interesting. And again, Captain Matthew, thank you so much for meeting with us today. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah, my pleasure. You asked some great questions.
Great. And thank you all for joining us for our inaugural Black History Month webinar. We're so excited to have you guys, and we hope to see you back soon. Thank you for, oh, that's great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Wow, he flew right through that. He was not a man of many words. It's only us. It's only three. It's only us.